Kermai get the Yaskin Corlia. Are to Ruddy Golan Alkish Ohio and Brahana to Jantag of Lishan Hospital Nation in the Poeshi, August Namli into Shinta and Oireachtas and budget, Emmy Suez Nismona, €1 billion. August Comer in Scale on Major Dirt and Board and Yalish and Costa Oireachtas, now will Jeru be in Scanel Shaw. So Shinkishta Tonna, Kajetish of Genulish, the AU, Ohio in the Costish Brisha, Eligata Cora and Merada, Ken were vis and Togrish or Krinia, August contain Masnu is Jerna, Major Lish Nakosasi Jerna. 8 months ago, the National Paediatric Hospital Development Board made a commitment that they would provide the Oireachtas Health Committee with the revised cost and the revised timeline in respect of the National Children's Hospital. This project is now years overdue and over €1 billion overrun. It's been a shambles from the start. It's been described by the Taoiseach as a debacle back in 2019, and yesterday the board was not able to give details of the time frame it would take to complete the construction of the hospital, which is not satisfactory. And it is absolutely unacceptable that they're not in a position to give clarity in relation to the rising costs of this project. Minister, there is a complete vacuum of transparency and accountability surrounding the development of the National Hospital. Total claims have now risen from 600 to 900, and most have been parked for later settlement, which is just kicking the can down the road. It is a never-ending saga of more claims, rising costs, and no completion date in sight. The sketchy information that the board provided indicates that we're now looking at the second half of 2024, if not 2025, at the earliest before the hospital is in a position to open its doors. So when is this hospital going to be completed? Does the government even know? And we shouldn't lose sight of the root causes of this scandal. Policy failure and ministerial incompetence was at its heart. In 2019, the government paid PwC €500,000 to review the cost overruns. It found that the total cost of the hospital had risen from the original budget of €790 million in 2013 up to €1.4 billion in December 2018. In fact, PwC were of the view that in 2019 that the all-in costs would be €1.73 billion. Now that is some overrun. They found that the overspend was a direct result, and I quote, of significant failures in the crucial planning and budgeting stages of the project. Not this year or last year, but from 2014 to 2019. It was at that time that the Taoiseach was the Minister for Health, from 2014 to 2016. It was he who stood over a two-stage procurement process despite knowing it was untested with significant risks. He was followed in that position by Simon Harris as Minister, who was informed by the Department of cost overruns as much as €391 million in August of 2018. He failed to share this information with his Cabinet colleagues and indeed with the Minister for Finance. And this is an absolute mess, Minister, and there is seemingly no accountability or transparency. We have literally no idea when the revised potential additional costs will be, given that now that we have 900 outstanding claims. The Hospital Board won't provide this information, so I'm asking you, as a Minister in Government, will you provide this information to the Dáil? Someone in Government must know. So what action is being taken, Minister, to rein in the costs and to bring this project under control? And what will be the final costs of this project? Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy. I cannot give you the final cost here today. We're in the middle of it. It's a live project, and as you say, there has been significant cost increases, changed contractual arrangements right through this process. We have a wider issue of significant cost inflation in the construction sector, and we also have a significant problem. We all recognise this in the planning and development and costing and delivery of major public construction projects in this country. And the Children's Hospital is, I'm afraid to say, an incredibly critical example of that. And it isn't just, in my mind, with regards to James's Street. I'd go back, looking at this project, going back even further. The original proposal, the site chosen in the Mater, which in my mind had real benefits, and there was real significant coherence there in terms of other transport plans, metro station being planned for the same site. both of which projects ended up not proceeding, and that is one of the reasons why we're in such incredible cost overruns on this. It's because time, it's the long time it's taking us to get through planning is one of the critical, and through to construction is one of the most critical factors in such overruns. But the project will be delivered. There is a significant milestone has been reached in the topping off of the main actual fabric of the building. So it is actually a time for us to focus on now delivering it, on getting it delivered in that 2014 or 2024 timeline, far from ideal, the very long delay. But for the health of the children of our country, it's important we do get it completed. And the very complex and very difficult contractual arrangements, and no one is going to try and ignore that reality in government, we will have to manage out to the completion of this hospital. And at that point, at least, we will have a world-leading facility for our health system. There have been developments, the development of the acute centre in Connolly, which is now up and running, which was part of the overall Children's Hospital strategy, but the main project has been bedevilled by significant delays, and I think part of the lessons we need to learn from that, I would not disagree with you, is that this two-phased contract process where the broad outline was agreed, but then further contractual difficulties arose right through the process. We should learn lessons from that. We've had significant difficulties with COVID, availability of workers, the construction sector itself acting on a very stop-start basis like the rest of the economy. And we have a wider problem of skills shortages in our economy, which is also putting up construction prices, particularly in the construction sector. None of those are going to be resolved immediately, but they are critical to the next steps for this government, is actually making sure we have the skills, making sure we do learn in terms of managing cost overruns in large public projects, and make sure we deliver particularly a new and better planning system so we don't have this incredibly long process, which is one of the reasons why the cost overruns are so high. It's not ideal. It has been a very unsatisfactory process from my mind right through, but it is going to be concluded with the delivery of a first-class children's hospital. That is the best, most important thing we need to focus on. I cannot give you a specific price here today because there's still contractual issues to be resolved. It would be a false figure if I gave it, but we will deliver it, minimising costs, the very best of the government's ability, and delivering it on the sort of time frame which is long delayed. No one wants that, but we are committing to make sure now that it's topped out, the building, the basic fabric is built, we need to complete it and deliver it for the people and children of this country.
Minister, with respect, listening to your answer, I believe that the Cabinet ministers have taken a hands-off approach in relation to this. I believe that you don't know what the estimated costs are. Maybe you don't want to know. Where I do agree with you is the root cause of this is the two-stage process, procurement process, a process that Leo Varadkar, as Minister for Health, signed off on. The cause of this is ministerial incompetence. It's what the PwC report found, that it wasn't because of inflation or other matters, but it was because of the lack of budgeting and failures in crucial planning at the early stages. And that's why we have a situation where Leo Varadkar promised that this project would be built by 2020 and that the all-in costs, including contingency and inflation, would be 650 million. We now have figures of 1.7 billion euro. We have 900 outstanding claims. And seriously, as leader of your party, as a senior member in Cabinet, can you not even tell the Dáil what the total quantum of those claims are? Are we just supposed to allow you to continue to write a blank cheque in relation to this project? What actions are the Cabinet taking to make sure that costs are reined in? Or is it a case that you have made such a mess of this back in the 2014 to 16 period that it's a case that you just have to pay no matter what comes?
Minister to respond.
Cabinet subcommittees have been meeting on a regular basis to assess just this project because of recognition of real concern about the contractual difficulties that have been there. So we've been paying all our attention and every intention to get it built and to keep the costs down. But if I was to come out here and give false promise in terms of what the exact final cost is here now, it would be guilty of the same thing that you're accusing others of. And I think there's a wider issue in our wider debate about construction, in housing, in transport, in water, and a whole range of other infrastructure, that we in the political system start to recognise that we can't all, which parties of all colours and shades do, promise everything at the cheapest price just to get it over the line and then deal with the consequences later. We do start having to be realistic in terms of what's the likely cost of various projects. And we can and will learn from this as an example. We have to procure them first and foremost through the we have to first and foremost get them through the planning system. And I would believe in terms of the cost overruns on this and the other main public transport and other main public infrastructure projects we have, the greatest factor in terms of cost inflation is actually the long lead times it takes to actually deliver projects. It's in improving that, I think, what we need to focus on, all of us, particularly in the planning system.
Thank you, Minister. I'm moving on to the Social Democrats. Catherine Murphy.
Minister, the government is tying itself up in knots trying to explain the screeching U-turns on the cuckoo funds. Yesterday, the Taoiseach said this capitulation to cuckoo funds had been signalled when the stamp duty increase was announced in May. But when Paschal Donoghue announced this measure, he said that 3 bodies would be exempt: local authorities, approved housing bodies and the housing agency. If he had signalled that he was about to exempt cuckoo funds from a measure that was designed to target cuckoo funds, it certainly would have stood out and it certainly would have caused a row on the floor of this House. The Taoiseach also told us that 2,400 social homes are due to be leased this year. They could be in jeopardy if the stamp duty surcharge was waived. So the cuckoo funds are not content with paying virtually no tax on their profits. They're not content with the extraordinarily lucrative 25-year contracts and very secure investments. Those investments have been described by some as government bonds on steroids. No, the state has to further sweeten the deal and exempt them from this stamp duty increase if it wants them to play ball. The revelation that 2,400 lease deals are about to be done with cuckoo funds was also a big surprise for 2021, that is. Last year, 1,440 social homes were delivered through that lease programme. The Minister for Housing now tells us that the number of lease deals in the pipeline is substantially more than the total amount that were leased for last year, despite everyone in government agreeing that this is terrible value for money. You might address that point. What does in the pipeline actually mean? Are there contracts in place? When Paschal Donoghue announced this measure in May, he said that there would be a 3-month transition period for the execution of binding contracts that had been entered into but not completed prior to the commencement of the resolution. So are we to understand this is additional to those ones that were exempt, that were in binding contracts? Because if it was the case that they were all in binding contracts, there would have been no need for that resolution last night. Perhaps you could answer a simple question, that is, how many lease deals do we expect in 2021? What's the ballpark? Because there's no transparency around this. Councillors only hear at local authority level after the deal is done. Indeed, when I raised this at Leaders some months ago, I was looked like as if I was, making it up, that there was only tiny numbers. Well, in fact, it is exactly what I thought it was at the time. So can you tell us what's in the pipeline? Can you tell us, is this over and above those that were already in existing contracts? And can you give a ballpark for this year? And do you accept that this is awful value for public money?
Minister.
I agree with the Taoiseach yesterday that what we will see in the Housing for All strategy, which will be published shortly, is a change in how we do leasing arrangements and a recognition that this is not the approach that we want to take as we develop a new Housing for All strategy, and it will change. But recognise that within, to answer your question directly, there are projected 2,450 units in this year's target and a direct build target of 9,500 units, 9,500 units. A percentage of the leased units would be in mortgage to rent schemes and repair and lease schemes. Roughly a third, as I understand, of those houses already leased so far this year. So it's not that in every single instance a lease arrangement, repair to lease and mortgage to rent lease, I think other parties have recognised may have a role to play. But we do need to change the policy and the approach. And whether that's in much longer leases with ownership reverting to the local authority or other such arrangements, that is what will be set out within the Housing for All strategy. My recollection in terms of during the implementation of this short-term measure to avoid what had happened in Maynooth and other locations where large volumes of housing estates being bought up, was that there was clear indication at that time that, for example, in regard to direct provision or social housing or such policy areas where we do want to see an immediate response in supply this year, that there was a clear signal that in that particular category we would look to try and take a different approach. But these are short-term emergency measures to address a particular problem. The key thing we need to get right now is the new Housing for All strategy and a different approach to housing. Yes, additional social housing, critically in my mind, additional cost rentable and affordable housing for purchase. And critically, it isn't all just about the numbers, it's about where the housing is going to make sure that we do get transport-led development housing close to new public transport systems, and we need to get more balanced region development so it's not all just a pressure on Dublin, my own constituency, yours too, but some of the areas where some of the worst rent increases in rent have occurred, the biggest problem exists. And lastly, with regard to that, in this new Housing for All strategy, it will be much stronger state engagement, including the use of public lands and the Land Development Agency to provide social and affordable housing, as was agreed in recent amendments to the affordable housing legislation. So no one is saying that the current leasing arrangement is something that we think is the future, that we have legacy issue here, targets, and immediate issue in terms of certain contracts have to be delivered upon. But the key change coming was signalled by the Taoiseach yesterday and is one that I agree with.
You described this as a short-term emergency measure for 25 years. Let's just talk about what this entails. A builder builds a housing estate. A cuckoo fund comes in and buys it in its entirety. They get exempt from stamp duty, the 10% stamp duty, because they're going to lease it to the local authority. The local authority is going to pay the equivalent, if not more, in terms of a mortgage for 25 years. It will then refurbish the house and hand it back to the original owner. Like, you couldn't make this up. This is not short-term. This is an abuse of public money. That's what this is. And you know what will be even more abusive is that we'll be told that the 1,400 and the 2,400, 3,800 houses, we'll be told that is part of the housing stock that the government have delivered. They haven't delivered it. Minister, will you accept this is desperate value for money?
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
Why did you go along with that 10% U-turn?
Minister.
Again, just on that, Minister O'Donoghue said in the Dáil on the May the 19th that multiple purchases of property are undertaken by bodies specifically for the purpose of providing social and affordable housing, and it is not intended, he said then, to apply the higher stamp duty rate to those instances. Just for clarity, but on your underlying point, I don't disagree. I think we do need to change approach. I think the massive ramping up and the massive investment we're about to make in social housing is not best provided if it is done in an arrangement where we have a 25-year lease with ownership not being transferred at the end. And my expectation is, in the Housing for All strategy, we will see a change in direction in that regard. It won't be a complete switch because there will be certain instances, very small number, the like sort of instance I made earlier, where lease arrangements may have a role, but it cannot provide a substantial part in the meeting of social or affordable housing targets that we all agree on that have to be delivered. So there will be a change.
Thank you, Minister.
It is imminent, the new Housing for All strategy, and within that, I think there will be a variety of different measures to see the overall change in housing policy.
Garmagat Regional Group. Oireachtas Cahilberg.
Garmagat, Laskin Corla, and good afternoon, Minister. Minister, I just want to use my time today to very much welcome your acceptance of two very significant amendments to the Climate Action Bill last week. I very much welcome this and hugely supportive of it. And the reason being is these two amendments will ensure that for the very first time that the farming community will get their due recognition when it comes to capturing and to storing carbon on their land, whether it's in their hedgerows, whether it's in their soil, or whether it's in their trees. And I think also this is potentially very positive from a farming perspective when it comes to setting carbon targets and carbon budgeting and sectoral emissions thresholds as well later on in the year, which I think is very positive from that perspective. Furthermore, I think it's important to acknowledge the positive contribution that the agricultural community can make to climate action, because that will further encourage good behaviour in that regard. I fully appreciate as well that while I accept that the principle is sound and the concept is good, that there's a lot of questions still out there. I have a lot of questions, and I know that the agricultural community and farming families do as well. And I fully appreciate that the Minister may not have all this information to hand, but the 5 questions that really jump out to me, first of all, would be how is this carbon sequestration? How is it going to be calculated? How is it going to be quantified? And if the Minister could shed some light on that, it would be much appreciated. Secondly, what is the state agency that's going to take the lead in coming up with such a formula that can be applied to various farms and various regions around the country? So what's the state agency involved? Thirdly, how long will it take, does the Minister reckon, before a formula can be agreed between various parties that can be applied? The fourth question I have is, does any other country do something similar? So rather than us reinventing the wheel all the time, could we take a template from another country and apply it or customise it to the Irish situation? And then my final question really is, how is individual farms or the farming community in general, how are they going to draw down these credits? Will there be any financial incentives there to assist them, and will there be any financial recognition for what they're doing from a climate point of view? So I'd be grateful if the Minister could touch on that. And again, as I said already, I appreciate the Minister may not have all this information to hand in relation to how this is going to be applied and how it's going to be implemented, but any light he could shed on the topic would be greatly appreciated. Thank you very much.
Minister.
Thank you very much indeed, Deputy. It is significant. We are about to change in how we approach climate in land use in a way that I believe would see farmers benefiting from our emissions reduction targets. The critical thing, the policy approach we're taking, is we want income to go up as emissions go down. And in bringing down emissions, it isn't always only just reducing the source of the emissions, so the source of, be it biogenic methane or nitrous oxide or carbon dioxide coming out for activities, but it's also looking at sinks. So being able to store carbon in the soil, being able to store carbon in forest, in woodlands, being able to stop carbon being emitted by re-wetting bogs, which allows us, that dry exposed bog, rather than emitting carbon into the atmosphere, to hold it. And it's recognising in those, what they call sinks, in the storing carbon in using nature-based solutions, is where payments will be able to come. In terms of how it's going to be quantified, we still have work to do. We still have to do in the Programme for Government Commitments, a key commitment is a full land use review to look at, we do have a lot of science and a lot of mapping happening on what's happening here, but we need further scientific information to be absolutely accurate and scientific in terms of what's actually happening. And there's a lot of changes happening, both in forestry and in wetlands and in grass and in other systems. So we need to do that proper land use review to have a full assessment. In terms of which agencies, to answer each of your 5 questions in turn, the likes of Teagasc and the EPA have critical roles, and other state agencies, the likes of Oireachtas and other state agencies. But I would single out Teagasc and EPA having a critical role as scientific organisations spreading best practice and helping us determine what are the policy levers that we will use to deliver it. As regard to how long it will probably take towards the latter part of this decade, middle to the latter part of this decade, and that's in tune with changes that are also going to occur at a European level. We have a further amendment in the Channel tomorrow, backing up those two amendments for agreed at committee stage, clarifying that it's European accounting systems, and that accounting system will continue to evolve. In 2026, the European accounting system will include wetlands and emissions from wetlands within the European system. We even expect next week further information when the Fit for 55, the European climate strategy for the next decade, comes out, that there will be further evolution, but it will take time. It will time for us to set up the scientific-based and trading-based solutions, as well as other policy levers to avail of those payments. Some will come sooner. Even on wetlands, the agreement in the CAP reform in recent weeks for farmers to be paid through CAP payments for storing carbon in wetlands is already here. So there's an evolving European and domestic attention on this as key part of the solution.
Deputy Berry.
Thank you, Minister, for that genuinely useful and helpful response, particularly in relation to how farmers might be able to monetise this particular situation, which is definitely good news. You mentioned there was going to be an amendment brought forward towards the upper house again tomorrow. So just my last question is, would the Minister envisage any more amendments being accepted? And could the Minister indicate when is the amended Climate Action Bill due to be brought back before the Dáil for consideration and final sign-off? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Deputy Minister.
I have to wait the report date tomorrow, but I don't expect other amendments on this one. It's a very complex issue. Even explaining the whole science of sinks and sources and different accounting mechanisms is in its own right an evolving and complex process. But I think the amendments we've introduced and the further amendment tomorrow do help well, the bill already, as I'd said in the Dáil debate on this, it very much recognised we were going to be using sources and sinks, and that we would be paying farmers. Just to briefly answer two other questions you asked, I didn't get a chance. I think New Zealand provides a model, and an example of that is their dairy farmers are switching away now from heavy fertiliser, pumped up ryegrass kind of model towards mixed sward. They're doing what a lot of smart farmers are already starting to do here. Really good nutrient management, really good soil management. So it is happening. And individual farms, we will be looking at similar systems they have in that country here, where there will be payments from other sectors for the nature-based services and solutions, including carbon sinks, that farmers and foresters provide. So that is coming. It will take some time to get the systems up in place, but it is part of the future for Irish agriculture.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you. And moving on now to the independent group, the Thomas Pringle.
Minister, recently in Donegal, residents around Glenties, Doohary and Leitrim Ward were blanketed with a leaflet drop announcing a new wind farm application in Cloghercar. This is in addition to a new application in a geographically adjacent Graffy area, a broadly similar landscape. The proposed Cloghercar project runs from Cleangart and Derrickmore Loch in the south through to Shallagans and Doohary, parallel to the Greebarrow River estuary. This 7-kilometre stretch of land is mainly peat bog, much of it with significant slopes. It is an environmentally sensitive landscape. The application will be by the heavily flawed strategic infrastructure development process. The process is similar to the SHD for large housing developments, that for all intents and purposes appears to serve only to exclude proper public consultation. As a consequence of this, An Bord Pleanála has seen 90% of its grants overturned by judicial review. The response to this from your government has been to propose pricing communities out of the process in direct contravention of the principles of Aarhus, which is strange as your legislative programme commits to strengthening access to justice through the Aarhus Convention Bill. Although, Minister, I'm not surprised that your government has taken the Trumpian, if we stop testing right now, we'd have very few cases approach to problem solving, as this administration and previous ones have serious form in this area. Governments of inaction have failed and continue to fail our citizens on so many fronts. I stood in front of the Taoiseach on November 18th last, and he told me that he was anxious to progress a comprehensive review of the wind energy guidelines. Nothing has happened. The following day, I raised a Mean Bog landslide under topical issues with Minister Noonan. As yet, nothing of consequence has emerged from the litany of investigations by an alphabet soup of organisations he outlined that day were to happen. Again, under questions on promised legislation on January 2nd this year, I raised with the Taoiseach both the focus review of the wind energy guidelines, which has been ongoing since September 2013, and the Mulcahy report into planning irregularities in Donegal, which had sat unpublished now on 8 different ministers' desks. And your boss told me, I will follow those up for the Deputy. I will talk to the Minister about those, and I've heard nothing since. We have Derry Bryan ongoing since 2003, total government inaction, and the cost of this inaction today stands at over €13.9 million. No plan, no action, only dither and spiralling costs. The present mealy-mouthed way that masquerades for participation does not work, because the provision of information is not participation, and neither are attempts to limit access to the courts. Minister, will you outline for me what actions your government intends to take to ensure communities across this country can be properly involved and consulted on significant development projects in their areas? Thank you.
Minister.
Thank you very much indeed. And I do understand the communities in this area, particularly the Gaeltacht communities, have been very concerned. It is, as I understand, only the very early stage in the planning application process, and I think it is critical that they are listened to and involved, and that there is real engagement. Nothing is certain in the planning system, but Penal as an independent agency will have to judge any application on its merits. I was pleased earlier this week to introduce or to launch further updated initiatives in regard to how we're looking to engage communities in this renewable revolution that is taking place, including looking for renewable direct ownership of new projects, but also very significant advances in terms of supports, our facilities, our benefits for local communities, and engagement with local communities in a way that's fair and that is in line with the Aarhus Convention, as you rightly say, is a critical part of European environmental legal structures. Critically in this, I believe, is the recent public consultation which EirGrid has been engaged in. I would say this particularly for Donegal, because it has recognised that areas like Donegal have seen very significant development compared to other parts of the country. It happens to be an area which probably the strongest wind resource that may explain that. But there is a real understanding that actually grid policy and renewables development policy go together, and Bord Pleanála will, I'm sure, take a very close eye to the conclusion of that consultation process, where EirGrid set out some of the key questions as to where are we going to develop our benefit from this. What we have is a huge economic resource. Including in that is the potential to bring industrial or other employment opportunities close to the wind, rather than always shipping it over long distance, so to look at the grid as well as the wind turbines themselves. That is a key part of the process. You're right, the wind energy guidelines have been there in consideration since 2013, and a real difficulty in getting final agreement on what the relevant measures, sound and other systems are, a place where neighbouring countries have been able to do that. We have not been able to get agreement. We do have to resolve that for both local communities and for developers, so that we're not, going back to what Deputy Doherty was saying earlier on, we have a process that's so long and drawn out that it actually frustrates everyone, sees people who don't want to end up in courts having to the cost and all the problems that involves. We will start now, we are starting to go offshore, and that particularly for Donegal has huge potential because those northwestern waters are also very significant. We will still have onshore development of renewable energy because it does give us real economic opportunities, but it has to be done in line with community interests and also environmental protection, and we commit as a government to making sure that that is the case.
Dr. Pringle.
Minister, you outlined that you're waiting for final agreement on the regulations. Who are you waiting for agreement with? Because as far as I know, nobody's been consulted in terms of final agreement except maybe the developers. And the reality is, what you've outlined in relation to EirGrid and stuff like that there sounds very good and very nice and everything like that there. But the reality is that they're not the developers of the wind farms. The developers of the wind farms are private developers right across the board who just basically railroad over communities, and then they end up in Bord and then they end up in the courts, and then the whole Aarhus Convention and everything else is trampled on. And what we need to do is to make sure that the people and communities are recognised and responded to. That is the reality of the situation, and that's what you need to do. And I think the first thing you could do as a step along that is publish the actual wind energy guidelines and put the actual guidelines in place that are useful and will benefit communities as well. Thank you.
Minister, to conclude.
I think the difficulty is not, or the negotiations is not with any developers. That's not the key consideration. It's agreement on sound standards and other distance parameters and standards, and looking to best international comparison. On that is where there has been difficulty in getting final agreement within government departments. There is in the first auction, or the auction system we introduced last year, we saw the first 7, as I recall, community energy projects getting approved, and then in the next auction system we will also see a number of community projects and real support for community investment. That on its own is not enough, though. We do have to have mechanisms where particularly those who live close to renewable energy systems, be it solar or wind, have the potential to gain, and that their concerns are listened to and heeded in Bord Pleanála, and also that the lessons from Derry Bryan and the recent bog slide last year up in Donegal are learnt from, so that we have to maintain the development of this industry has to be in tune with protection of the environment, not hindering it.
Thank you.
And those lessons will be learnt, and Bord Pleanála will apply them.
Garmagat.